The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the busy emergency department of St. Mary's General Hospital as Sarah Chun pushed through the automatic glass doors for her first day. At 26 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that others often mistook for shyness. Her black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her navy blue scrubs were perfectly pressed. What her new colleagues didn't know was that those same hands that now carried a simple nursing bag had once performed emergency medical procedures in combat zones halfway around the world. Sarah approached the nurses' station where a group of veteran staff members clustered around their morning coffee. The charge nurse, Linda Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and tired eyes, looked up from her clipboard. "You must be the new hire," Linda said without much enthusiasm. "Sarah Chun, right? Fresh out of nursing school." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied softly, her voice barely audible over the chaos of the emergency room. "I'm ready to start wherever you need me." This response drew snickers from a few of the other nurses. Jennifer Walsh, a blonde woman in her early 30s who seemed to command attention wherever she went, rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, great, another timid little mouse. I bet she faints at the first sight of blood." The comment sparked laughter among Jennifer's followers. Mark Stevens, a male nurse who had been working in the ER for 3 years, joined in. "I give her a week before she runs, crying back to whatever small town she came from. This isn't nursing school anymore, sweetheart." Sarah said nothing, simply nodding politely as Linda handed her a hospital identification badge and a stack of orientation paperwork. "You'll shadow Jennifer today," Linda announced. "She'll show you the ropes and how we do things around here." Jennifer's smile was anything but welcoming. "Perfect. Try to keep up and don't get in my way. We don't have time to babysit." As the morning shift began in earnest, Sarah followed Jennifer through the maze of emergency room bays. The department was typical of any large urban hospital, constantly busy, understaffed, and filled with the controlled chaos that healthcare workers had learned to navigate. Patients filled every available space. An elderly man clutching his chest, a young mother holding a feverish child, a construction worker with a bloodied hand wrapped in a dirty towel. "The first thing you need to understand," Jennifer explained as they walked, her voice dripping with condescension, "is that this isn't some quiet clinic where you can take your time with every patient. People's lives are on the line, and if you can't handle the pressure, you need to find another job." Sarah listened intently, observing everything around her. She noticed which equipment was stored where, memorized the layout of the medication room, and mentally cataloged the location of every emergency supply. Her training had taught her that preparation could mean the difference between life and death. Their first patient was Mrs. Henderson, an 80-year-old woman who had fallen at home and injured her hip. As Jennifer began the initial assessment, she spoke to Sarah without looking at her. "Take notes on everything I do. Pay attention to how I talk to the patient and handle the examination." But as Jennifer worked, Sarah noticed several concerning things. Jennifer's bedside manner was brisk to the point of being rude. She didn't properly introduce herself to Mrs. Henderson, spoke over the elderly woman when she tried to explain her pain, and rushed through the physical examination without giving adequate time for the patient to respond to questions. "Mrs. Henderson," Jennifer said impatiently, "I need you to rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And make it quick, we have other patients waiting." The elderly woman looked confused and intimidated. I don't understand, dear. What does 10 mean?" Jennifer sighed heavily. "10 means it's the worst pain you've ever felt in your life. 1 means it barely hurts. Pick a number." Sarah watched as Mrs. Henderson's eyes filled with tears. The woman was clearly in significant pain, but Jennifer's harsh tone was making her too nervous to communicate effectively. Without thinking, Sarah stepped forward. "Mrs. Henderson," Sarah said gently, kneeling beside the hospital bed, so she was at eye level with the patient. "I know this is scary, and you're hurting. Take your time. Can you tell me where it hurts the most?" Jennifer shot Sarah a sharp look. "I'm conducting this assessment. Step back and observe like you're supposed to." But Mrs. Henderson had already begun responding to Sarah's gentle approach. "Oh, thank you, dear. It's my right hip. The pain is terrible when I try to move, but when I stay still like this, it's more manageable. Sarah nodded understandingly. That helps us know how to help you better. On that scale the other nurse mentioned, if we say 1 is like a small headache and 10 is like the worst pain imaginable, where would you put your pain right now? About a 7, I think, Mrs. Henderson replied, her voice steadier now. Jennifer's face flushed with anger. I said, step back. You're not the nurse in charge here. The tension in the room was palpable, but before Sarah could respond, Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, entered the bay. How's our hip fracture looking? He asked, glancing at the chart. Patient reports pain level of 7 out of 10, Sarah replied automatically, then caught herself. I'm sorry, Jennifer was conducting the assessment. Dr. Martinez looked between the two nurses, sensing the tension. Well, whoever gathered that information, it's helpful. Let's get Mrs. Henderson to radiology for some x-rays. Jennifer, can you arrange transport? As Jennifer left to coordinate with the radiology department, Dr. Martinez lingered for a moment. A new nurse, right? Sarah, yes, sir. Good instincts with the patient communication. Keep that up. He made a few notes in the chart and moved on to his next patient. The rest of the morning continued in much the same pattern. Jennifer would begin patient interactions with her typical rushed, impersonal approach, and Sarah would quietly observe, occasionally stepping in when she noticed a patient was becoming confused or distressed by Jennifer's manner. By lunchtime, word had spread among the nursing staff about the new girl who thinks she knows better than everyone else. Sarah sat alone in the cafeteria, eating a simple sandwich she had brought from home, while clusters of nurses at nearby tables whispered and glanced in her direction. I heard she actually interrupted Jennifer during a patient assessment, one nurse said to her friend. Can you believe that? On her first day, Jennifer's been here for 8 years, another replied. If I were that girl, I'd watch my step. Jennifer doesn't forget things like that. Sarah could hear every word, but she continued eating quietly, her expression unchanged. She had faced far more serious challenges than workplace gossip, though her colleagues had no way of knowing that. After lunch, the afternoon brought a new wave of patients and a new level of hostility from Jennifer. Since you seem to think you know so much about nursing, Jennifer said coldly, why don't you handle the next patient assessment yourself? I'll just observe and see how the expert does it. Their next patient was Tommy Martinez, a 7-year-old boy who had fallen from his bicycle and scraped his knee badly. He was crying loudly while his mother tried to comfort him. Several other patients in nearby bays were becoming agitated by the noise. Go ahead, Jennifer said with her arms crossed. Show me what you learned in nursing school. Sarah approached the frightened child and his anxious mother calmly. Itoni, Sara. I'm a nurse here, and I'm going to help make your knee feel better. Is that okay? Tommy continued crying, but nodded slightly. Sarah knelt down to his level, just as she had with Mrs. Henderson. I bet that knee really hurts. You were very brave coming here to get help. It hurts so much, Tommy sobbed. And there's blood everywhere. You're right, there is some blood, but you know what? That just means your body is trying to fix itself. Blood helps carry all the healing helpers to where they're needed most. Pretty cool, right? Tommy's crying began to subside as he became interested in what Sarah was saying. His mother watched with relief as the young nurse continued to explain the healing process in terms the child could understand while she gently cleaned the wound. Now, this might sting just a little bit when I clean it, Sarah warned. But I'll count to 3, and then it'll be over. Can you help me count? Together, they counted to 3 while Sarah quickly but thoroughly cleaned the scrape. Tommy barely whimpered. Within 15 minutes, his knee was cleaned, treated, and bandaged, and he was showing off his colorful bandage to his mother. Thank you so much, Tommy's mother said to Sarah as they prepared to leave. You were wonderful with him. He was so scared, but you made him feel safe. After they left, Jennifer's expression was even more sour than before. Beginner's luck, she muttered. Wait until you have to deal with a real emergency, not just a skin knee. As if summoned by her words, the emergency department suddenly erupted in activity. The overhead speaker crackled to life. Trauma alert, trauma alert. ETA, 3 minutes. Multiple vehicle accident, 3 patients en route. All available staff to Trauma Bay 1. The transformation in the emergency department was immediate. Nurses and doctors moved with practiced efficiency, preparing equipment and clearing space. Sarah followed Jennifer toward the trauma bay, her heart rate steady despite the chaos around her. "Now you'll see what real nursing is like," Jennifer said as they hurried down the hallway. "This isn't about being nice and gentle anymore. This is about life and death." The ambulance sirens grew louder as they approached the hospital. Through the windows, Sarah could see the flashing lights pulling into the ambulance bay. In moments, the first stretcher would come through those doors, and Sarah would face her first real test in her new job. But what Jennifer and the other nurses didn't know was that Sarah had been in situations like this before, situations far more intense than anything a civilian hospital typically saw. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the EMTs began wheeling in the first patient, Sarah's training from another life began to surface, though she kept it carefully hidden. The first patient was a middle-aged man, conscious but clearly in pain. 38-year-old male, the EMT called out as they moved toward the trauma bay. Rear-ended at high speed, complaining of chest and abdominal pain. Vital stable, but we got possible internal injuries. Dr. Martinez took charge immediately. Bay 1, full trauma workup. Jennifer, I need you on vitals and assessment. Sarah, you're observing only. But as they transferred the patient to the hospital bed, complications arose quickly. The man's blood pressure began dropping rapidly, and his skin took on a grayish pallor that spoke of internal bleeding. "His pressure's dropping fast," Jennifer announced, but there was a note of panic in her voice that hadn't been there before. 80/50 and falling. "Give me 2 large-bore IVs and type and cross for 6 units, Dr. Martinez ordered. "We need to get him to surgery now." As Jennifer struggled to establish the 4 lines, her hands shaking slightly under pressure, Sarah watched the monitors carefully. She could see what was happening before anyone else called it out. The patient was going into shock, and they had minutes, not hours, to stabilize him. The second ambulance arrived as the team worked frantically on the first patient. Then the third. Suddenly, the trauma bay was filled with 3 critical patients, and not enough hands to manage them all effectively. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez called out desperately, "I know you're supposed to be observing, but I need another set of hands. Can you handle basic vitals monitoring on patient 3 while we work on this one?" Sarah moved to the third patient without hesitation, a teenage girl who was conscious but had obvious leg fractures from the accident. "Hi, honey," Sarah said softly to the frightened girl as she began checking vital signs. "I'm Sarah, and I'm going to take care of you. What's your name?" "Emma," the girl whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Is my mom okay?" "She was in the car with me." Sarah continued her assessment while talking calmly to Emma. "The doctors are taking very good care of everyone from your accident. Right now, my job is to take care of you. Can you tell me where it hurts the most?" As Sarah worked with Emma, she noticed something the others had missed in the chaos. Emma's left leg wasn't just fractured. The angle and the way she was positioning it suggested possible nerve damage that could be permanent if not addressed quickly. "Dr. Martinez," Sarah called out clearly but calmly, "I think we need ortho to look at patient 3's left leg. Possible nerve involvement." Dr. Martinez glanced over quickly, then looked more carefully at Emma's leg positioning. "Good catch. Jennifer, call orthopedic stat." But Jennifer was still struggling with the 4 on patient 1, her hands shaking as she tried to find a vein on the dehydrated patient. "I can't get this line," she admitted, frustration and panic mixing in her voice. Without being asked, Sarah moved to help. "May I?" she asked quietly. Jennifer nodded, stepping back as Sarah took over. With quick, confident movements, Sarah established the 4 line in less than 30 seconds. Her hands were completely steady, her movements precise and practiced. Dr. Martinez looked up in surprise. "Where did you learn to start IVs like that?" "Practice," Sarah replied simply, returning to monitor Emma, while Jennifer stared at her with a mixture of surprise and resentment. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity as all three accident victims were stabilized and sent to various departments for surgery or further treatment. As the trauma bay finally quieted down, the nursing staff began cleaning up and restocking equipment. "Not bad for a first day," Dr. Martinez said to Sarah as he completed his notes. "You kept your head under pressure. That's not something you can teach." After he left, Sarah found herself alone in the trauma bay with Jennifer, who was angrily slamming supplies into storage compartments. "I don't know what game you're playing," Jennifer said without looking at Sarah, "but don't think one good day makes you some kind of hero. You got lucky, that's all." Sarah continued cleaning equipment quietly. "I'm not trying to be anything except a good nurse." "Right," Jennifer scoffed. "And I suppose you just happen to know how to spot nerve damage and start difficult IVs because they taught you so well in nursing school." Before Sarah could respond, Linda, the charge nurse, appeared in the doorway. "Sarah, I need to see you in my office." Sarah followed Linda down the hallway, wondering if her first day was about to become her last day. Other nurses watched as they walked past, whispering among themselves about what the new girl might have done wrong. In Linda's small office, crammed with schedules, policy manuals, and years of accumulated paperwork, Linda gestured for Sarah to sit down. "So," Linda began, leaning back in her chair, "Dr. Martinez gave me quite a report about your performance today. He was impressed." Sarah waited silently. "He said you showed excellent clinical judgment, kept calm under pressure, and demonstrated advanced technical skills. Those aren't exactly typical comments about a new graduate nurse on their first day." Still, Sarah said nothing, though Linda noticed her shoulders tense slightly. "I've been a nurse for 32 years, Linda continued. "I've seen hundreds of new graduates come through this department. Most of them are terrified their first day. They make mistakes, they need constant supervision, and they certainly don't jump in to help during major traumas." Linda leaned forward, studying Sarah's face carefully. "So, I have to ask, where exactly did you get your experience? Your application says you graduated from nursing school 6 months ago, but your skills suggest otherwise." Sarah met Lindaus gay steadily. "I learned quickly in school. I had good instructors." "Uh-huh." Linda didn't sound convinced. "And the way you handled that difficult for? Most nurses take years to develop that kind of confidence." "I practiced a lot during clinicals." Linda stared at her for a long moment. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. I don't care what your background is, military, previous healthcare experience, whatever. What I care about is whether you can do the job safely and effectively. Today suggests you can." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Linda caught a flicker of something in her eyes at the mention of military service. "However," Linda continued, "you need to understand the dynamics of this unit. You've already made some enemies today, and that can make your job much harder than it needs to be. Jennifer has a lot of influence with the other nurses. If she decides to make your life difficult, she can." "I'm not trying to make enemies," Sarah said quietly. "I just want to take good care of patients." "I believe you, but you need to be smarter about how you handle the politics around here. Don't show up to senior nurses, even if you know a better way to do something. Ask questions instead of jumping in with answers. Make them feel like they're teaching you, even if you already know what to do." Linda's advice was well-meaning, but Sarah had never been good at pretending to be less capable than she was. In her previous life, competence was valued above all else, and false modesty could get people killed. "I understand," she said, though Linda could tell she didn't really agree with the approach. "Good. You're scheduled for 3 more orientation shifts with Jennifer. Try to stay on her good side, or at least don't antagonize her further." As Sarah left Linda's office, she could see clusters of nurses watching her and whispering. She overheard fragments of their conversations as she walked past. "Thinks she's better than everyone else. Probably lied on her application. Jennifer says she's trouble." Sarah gathered her things from her locker and prepared to leave for the day. Her first day had gone both better and worse than she had expected. Better because she knew she could do the job well, worse because she had apparently already made enemies among her colleagues. As she walked toward the parking garage, she pulled out her cell phone and noticed several missed calls from a number she recognized but hadn't seen in months. She hesitated for a moment, then put the phone back in her pocket without returning the call. That part of her life was over now. She was just Sarah Chun, a new graduate nurse trying to build a civilian career. But as she drove home to her small apartment across town, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed new life might not be as simple to maintain as she had hoped. The skills that had kept her alive in war zones were the same skills that had impressed Dr. Martinez and threatened Jennifer. She couldn't seem to be good at her job without revealing more about herself than she intended to. The next morning would bring new challenges, and Sarah suspected that Jennifer's hostility was only going to get worse. What she didn't know was that her past was about to catch up with her in ways she never could have imagined, and that within days, everyone at St. Mary's General Hospital would learn exactly who Sarah Chun really was. For now, though, she was just another nurse finishing her first day, driving home through the city streets, trying to figure out how to fit into a world that was supposed to be safer and simpler than the one she had left behind. The irony wasn't lost on her that in trying to save lives in a peaceful hospital, she had somehow created more conflict than she had faced in actual combat zones. As she pulled into her apartment complex parking lot, Sarah made a decision. Tomorrow, she would try Linda's approach. She would be quieter, more deferential, and more careful about when and how she demonstrated her abilities. She would try to be the kind of new nurse her colleagues expected, uncertain, grateful for guidance, and appropriately impressed by their experience. But even as she made that resolution, Sarah knew it would be difficult to maintain. She had been trained to take charge in crisis situations, to trust her instincts, and to act quickly when lives were at stake. Pretending to be helpless went against every instinct she had developed over the past several years. The missed calls on her phone continued to bother her as she climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. She knew what those calls were about, and she knew that ignoring them wouldn't make them go away forever. But she also knew that answering them would complicate the simple life she was trying to build. Inside her sparse apartment, Sarah changed out of her scrubs and sat down with a cup of tea to reflect on her first day. Despite the interpersonal challenges, she had felt truly fulfilled for the first time in months. Helping patients, using her medical skills, working as part of a healthcare team. These things felt right in a way that nothing had since she left the service. She just had to figure out how to do the job she loved without revealing the experiences that had prepared her for it. Tomorrow would be day 2, and she was determined to make it go more smoothly than the first Sarah's second day at St. Mary's General Hospital began with an intentional strategy. She arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to establish a more positive dynamic with Jennifer and the other nurses. The emergency department was already bustling with the organized chaos of morning shift change, and Sarah made her way to the nurses' station with careful optimism. "Good morning," she said quietly to the group of nurses gathered around their coffee and patient reports. Several of them looked up with expressions ranging from indifferent to openly hostile. Jennifer barely acknowledged her presence. "You're early," she said without looking up from her clipboard. "Eager to show off more of your nursing school skills?" The sarcasm in Jennifer's voice was unmistakable, and Sarah could see other nurses exchanging glances. Clearly, word about yesterday's events had spread throughout the department. "I just wanted to be ready for whatever you need to teach me today," Sarah replied, following Linda's advice about being more deferential. Mark Stevens, the male nurse who had made comments about her the day before, snorted. "Oh, now she wants to learn. Yesterday, she was practically doing surgery in the trauma bay." "That's enough," Linda said sharply as she approached the group. "We have patients to take care of. Sarah, you're still with Jennifer today. Jennifer, I want you to focus on medication administration procedures and documentation. Make sure she understands our protocols." Jennifer's smile was cold. "Oh, I'll make sure she understands everything." As they walked toward their first patient assignment, Jennifer's demeanor was noticeably more aggressive than the previous day. "Since you seem to think you know so much about emergency nursing," she said, Let's see how you handle the boring, routine work that makes up 90% of this job. Their first patient was Mr. Rodriguez, a diabetic man in his 60s who had come in for routine blood sugar monitoring and medication adjustment. It should have been a straightforward case, but Jennifer seemed determined to make it as complicated as possible. I want you to calculate his insulin dosage based on his current glucose level, Jennifer said, handing Sarah the patient's chart. And don't just guess. Show me your work. Sarah reviewed Mr. Rodriguez's chart carefully. His blood glucose was 180, and according to the sliding scale insulin orders, he needed 4 units of regular insulin. The calculation was basic nursing math that any first-year student could handle. 4 units of regular insulin, Sarah said after double-checking her work. Are you sure? Jennifer asked with a condescending tone. Because if you're wrong, you could put this patient in a hypoglycemic shock. Do you understand what that means? Sarah nodded patiently. Yes, I understand hypoglycemia. The calculation is correct, for units based on the sliding scale orders. Jennifer made a show of checking Sarah's work, then grudgingly agreed it was correct. But instead of allowing Sarah to administer the medication, Jennifer took over. I'll do this. You just observe and try to learn something. As the morning progressed, this pattern continued. Jennifer would assign Sarah tasks, then either take over before Sarah could complete them or criticize minor aspects of Sarah's technique. It was clearly designed to undermine Sarah's confidence and demonstrate Jennifer's authority to any observing staff members. By the time lunch break arrived, Sarah was frustrated but determined not to let Jennifer's behavior affect her patient care. She had dealt with far more serious forms of intimidation and hazing in her previous career, though the petty workplace politics somehow felt more exhausting than physical challenges she had faced. During lunch, Sarah sat alone again, but this time she was approached by Dr. Martinez, who took a seat across from her in the cafeteria. How's the orientation going? He asked, unwrapping his own sandwich. It's going well, Sarah replied diplomatically. I'm learning a lot about the hospital's procedures. Dr. Martinez studied her face. I've been thinking about yesterday. That was some pretty advanced clinical thinking you demonstrated. The way you spotted the potential nerve damage, the confidence with that 4, it reminded me of combat medics I've worked with. Sarah's expression remained carefully neutral, but Dr. Martinez noticed her slight tensing at his words. I did my residency at a military hospital, he continued. Worked with a lot of former combat medics who transitioned to civilian nursing. They had a particular way of handling crisis situations. Very calm, very competent, very professional. I just had good instructors, Sarah said, giving the same response she had given Linda. Dr. Martinez didn't seem convinced any more than Linda had been. Well, regardless of where you learned it, you've got good instincts. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. After lunch, the afternoon brought a new challenge. The emergency department received notification of incoming ambulances from a house fire, a family with smoke inhalation, and possible burns. As the department prepared for the arrivals, Jennifer saw an opportunity to put Sarah in a difficult position. Since you handled that trauma so well yesterday, Jennifer announced loudly enough for other nurses to hear, why don't you take the lead on triage when these patients arrive? I'm sure your nursing school training covered mass casualty events. It was clearly a setup. Jennifer was hoping Sarah would fail in front of everyone, proving that her performance the previous day had been luck rather than skill. Several other nurses gathered to watch what they assumed would be Sarah's humiliation. But as the ambulances arrived and the first patients were wheeled in, Sarah's training from another life took over despite her efforts to suppress it. The first patient was a mother in her 30s with moderate smoke inhalation, but no visible burns. Sarah's assessment was quick, but thorough. Respiratory rate 24, slight stridor, oxygen saturation 91% on room air, she reported to Dr. Martinez. I recommend oxygen therapy and bronchodilators. She'll need chest x-rays, but appears stable for now. The second patient was more serious. A 6-year-old boy with second-degree burns on his arms and more severe smoke inhalation. Sarah's assessment was even more rapid and precise. Pediatric patient, approximately 6 years old, second-degree burns to bilateral upper extremities covering roughly 8% of body surface area. Respiratory distress with oxygen saturation 87%. He needs immediate oxygen for fluids for burn management and pain control. Recommend burn unit consultation. Dr. Martinez looked at Sarah with undisguised amazement. That was textbook triage assessment. Where exactly did you learn to do patient evaluation like that? Before Sarah could answer, the third ambulance arrived with the father, who was unconscious and had suffered more severe burns and smoke inhalation. Without hesitation, Sarah moved to help transfer him to the trauma bay. Unconscious adult male, severe smoke inhalation, possible carbon monoxide poisoning based on cherry red skin coloration. Third-degree burns to chest and arms, approximately 15% body surface area. He needs immediate intubation, 100% oxygen, for access and burn unit transfer. As the team worked to stabilize the father, Sarah continued to coordinate care for all three family members with a level of efficiency and competence that left everyone watching speechless. She seemed to anticipate what equipment and medications would be needed, where family members should be positioned, and how to manage the emotional trauma of the situation while maintaining clinical focus. Jennifer stood watching with her mouth open, unable to find any fault with Sarah's performance. In fact, Sarah was demonstrating a level of emergency nursing skill that surpassed many of the veteran staff members. Sarah, Dr. Martinez said as they prepared to transfer the father to the burn unit, I need you to be honest with me. What did you really learn to do this? The question hung in the air as other staff members gathered around, all curious about the quiet new nurse who seemed to possess mysterious advanced skills. Sarah looked around at all the faces watching her, realizing that her carefully constructed cover story was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. I had very good clinical instructors, she repeated, but even she could hear how inadequate that explanation sounded. Clinical instructors don't teach mass casualty triage protocols to nursing students, Dr. Martinez said gently, but firmly. And they certainly don't teach the kind of rapid assessment techniques you just demonstrated. Those are military-level skills. The emergency department had grown quiet around them. Even the usual sounds of monitors and equipment seemed muted as everyone waited for Sarah's response. Before she could answer, her cell phone rang. She glanced at the display and saw the same number that had been calling her for days. This time, however, she couldn't ignore it any longer. Excuse me, she said quietly. I need to take this call. She stepped into an empty patient bay and answered the phone. This is Sarah. Chief Petty Officer Chun, a familiar voice said on the other end. This is Commander Williams. We need to talk. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Commander Williams was her former commanding officer in the Navy Medical Corps, and his use of her former rank meant this wasn't a social call. Sir, I'm no longer in the service, she said quietly, hoping no one could overhear. I'm working as a civilian nurse now. I'm aware of your current employment, Chun, but we have a situation developing that requires your specific skill set. I'm sending a car to pick you up. With respect, sir, I can't just leave work. I'm in the middle of a shift, and I have patients to care for. This is a matter of national security, Petty Officer Chun. The car will be there in 30 minutes. Be ready. The line went dead. Sarah stood holding the phone, feeling the weight of her two worlds colliding in ways she had hoped would never happen. When she returned to the nurse's station, everyone was still waiting for answers about her background. Dr. Martinez approached her immediately. Sarah, we need to talk about your qualifications and experience. I can't have nurses working in my department without knowing their actual level of training. I understand, Sarah said, but she was distracted by the knowledge that in 30 minutes, her carefully guarded secret would likely be exposed to everyone. Jennifer, sensing an opportunity to finally discredit Sarah, stepped forward. I think we all deserve to know who we're working with. If she's been lying about her background, what else has she been lying about? I haven't lied about anything, Sarah said firmly. I graduated from nursing school 6 months ago, and I'm licensed to practice in this state. Everything on my application is true. But not complete, Dr. Martinez observed. There's obviously more to your story. Sarah was saved from having to respond by the arrival of another ambulance. As the EMTs wheeled an elderly man having a heart attack, the department's attention shifted to the immediate crisis. But Sarah knew this was only a temporary reprieve. As she assisted with the cardiac patient, Sarah's mind raced. In 25 minutes, a military car would arrive to take her away, and everyone at the hospital would know that their quiet new nurse was not who she appeared to be. Her hope of building a simple, anonymous civilian life was about to end. The cardiac patient was successfully stabilized and sent to the cardiac catheterization lab, but as the department began to return to normal operations, Sarah could see Dr. Martinez and Linda having an intense discussion. They kept glancing in her direction, and Sarah knew they were deciding how to handle the situation. Jennifer was also watching carefully, clearly hoping that Sarah was about to be fired or suspended. She had gathered several other nurses around her, and Sarah could see them whispering and speculating about what Sarah might be hiding. With 15 minutes until the military car arrived, Sarah made a decision. She couldn't let her colleagues think she was dishonest or unqualified, but she also couldn't reveal operational details about her military service. Dr. Martinez, she said, approaching him, and Linda, could I speak with both of you privately for a moment? They followed her into Linda's office, where Sarah closed the door and took a deep breath. You're right that there's more to my background than I've shared, she began. I was in the Navy Medical Corps before I became a civilian nurse. I served as a hospital corpsman for 4 years, including deployments to combat zones. Linda and Dr. Martinez exchanged glances. That explains a lot, Dr. Martinez said. Why didn't you just tell us that from the beginning? Because I wanted to start fresh. I didn't want people to treat me differently or have expectations based on my military service. I just wanted to be a good nurse. Sarah, Linda said gently, military medical experience is an asset, not something to hide. We value that kind of background. Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Ms. Rodriguez, a voice called. There are some gentlemen here asking for Sarah Chun. Sarah's heart sank. Through the office window, she could see 2 men in dark suits standing at the nurse's station. They were clearly military despite their civilian clothes, and their presence was drawing attention from everyone in the department. I need to go, Sarah said quietly. I'm sorry, but this is something I can't explain right now. She opened the office door and walked toward the 2 men, aware that every nurse, doctor, and patient in the area was watching. Jennifer's eyes were wide with speculation, and Sarah could practically see the gossip mill spinning into overdrive. Sarah Chun, one of the men asked. Yes, we need you to come with us, ma'am. It's urgent. Sarah looked back at Dr. Martinez and Linda, who were standing in the office doorway, watching with confused expressions. I'm sorry, she called to them. I'll explain everything when I get back. As she walked toward the exit with the 2 military officials, Sarah could hear the explosion of conversation behind her. She knew that by the time she returned to work, if she returned to work, everyone would know that their quiet new nurse was involved with something far beyond their normal experience. The last thing she heard as the elevator doors closed was Jennifer's voice. I knew there was something weird about her. Nobody learns to do IVs like that in nursing school. In the elevator, one of the military officials handed Sarah a briefing folder. Ma'am, we're en route to a secure facility. Commander Williams will brief you on the situation, but I can tell you it involves a hostage situation at a foreign embassy. They specifically requested you. Sarah opened the folder and began reading. Within minutes, she was transported back to her old life. The life where her medical skills were used in high-stakes international situations, where every decision could have diplomatic and military consequences, and where her ability to remain calm under extreme pressure wasn't just appreciated, it was essential for mission success. As their car pulled away from the hospital, Sarah wondered if she would ever be able to return to the simple life she had been trying to build. Her cover as a quiet new nurse was blown, and soon everyone at St. Mary's would know that Sarah Chun was much more than she appeared to be. But what worried her most was not the exposure of her background. What worried her was how easily she had slipped back in her military mindset when the call came. Despite her best efforts to become a civilian, she was still, at her core, Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chun of the United States Navy Medical Corps. And now that world was calling her back. The secure facility was located in an unremarkable office building downtown, but Sarah recognized it immediately as a military intelligence operations center. She had been in similar facilities during her service, places where civilian emergencies intersected with national security concerns. As she was escorted through multiple security checkpoints, her mind shifted fully into the operational mode she had thought she left behind. Commander Williams was waiting for her in a briefing room equipped with multiple monitors and communication equipment. At 45, he was a career naval officer with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Sarah had served under his command during 2 deployments, and she trusted his judgment implicitly. "Chief Petty Officer Chun," he said formally as she entered the room. "Sir, I'm no longer active duty," Sarah replied, though she found herself automatically standing at attention. "For the next several hours, you are. We've temporarily reactivated your commission under emergency authority. The situation requires your specific combination of medical expertise and language skills." Commander Williams gestured to the monitors, which showed satellite imagery of a compound in Eastern Europe. 6 hours ago, armed militants took control of the American embassy in Moldavia. They're holding 12 hostages, including Ambassador Richardson and his family. Among the hostages are 3 individuals requiring immediate medical attention. Sarah studied the intelligence reports as Commander Williams continued. The militants have refused to allow any local medical personnel into the embassy. They've made one specific demand. They want an American military medic who speaks fluent Romanian and has experience treating combat injuries. "They asked for me specifically?" Sarah asked, though she was already beginning to understand the implications. "Not by name, but you're one of only 3 active or recently active naval medical personnel who meet their criteria. The other 2 are currently deployed in classified locations and cannot be extracted in time." The briefing continued for another hour as Sarah was brought up to speed on the political situation, the identities of the hostages, and the specific medical challenges she would face. 2 of the hostages had been injured during the initial assault and needed treatment for gunshot wounds. The third was Ambassador Richardson's 8-year-old daughter, who was diabetic and had been without her insulin for over 6 hours. "The plan is straightforward," Commander Williams explained. "You'll be flown to the embassy via helicopter. You'll provide medical treatment to the hostages while our negotiation team works to secure their release. Once the situation is resolved, you'll be extracted and returned to civilian status." Sarah reviewed the medical supplies list and mission parameters. It was exactly the kind of high-stakes medical mission she had performed dozens of times during her military career. The only difference was that this time, she had colleagues at St. Mary's General Hospital who were probably wondering where she had disappeared to. "Sir, what about my civilian job? I was in the middle of a shift when you called me." Commander Williams' expression softened slightly. "I know this complicates your transition to civilian life, Chun, but right now, there are American lives at stake, and you're the best qualified person to save them." Sarah nodded, accepting the reality of the situation. "When do we leave?" 30 minutes. There's a Navy helicopter on the hospital helipad waiting for you." Sarah felt a moment of panic. The hospital helipad? At St. Mary's? It was the most secure location for extraction. The helicopter has been there for the past hour. Meanwhile, back at St. Mary's General Hospital, the emergency department was in chaos of a different sort. The arrival of military officials to collect Sarah had sparked intense speculation among the staff, but the appearance of a Navy helicopter on the hospital helipad had elevated the situation to something approaching a media circus. Jennifer had immediately called several of her friends to share the gossip about the mysterious new nurse who had been picked up by what appeared to be federal agents. Within hours, the story had spread throughout the hospital and into the broader medical community. Dr. Martinez and Linda had tried to maintain normal operations, but it was difficult to focus on routine patient care when a military helicopter was parked on their roof and their newest nurse had been whisked away by government officials. "I've never seen anything like this," Linda said to Dr. Martinez as they watched the helicopter through the administrative office windows. "In 32 years of nursing, I've never had the military come collect one of my staff members." "She was definitely more than she appeared to be," Dr. Martinez replied. "But I had no idea it was anything like this." Jennifer, meanwhile, was holding court in the break room, sharing her theories about Sarah with anyone who would listen. "I knew from the first day that there was something off about her. Normal nursing school graduates don't have those kinds of skills. She was obviously some kind of spy or special forces person." Mark Stevens, who had initially dismissed Sarah as too weak for emergency nursing, was now reconsidering his assessment. "If she was military, that explains a lot. Military medics are trained differently than civilian nurses." "But why would she hide it?" asked Rebecca Martinez, a newer nurse who had watched Sarah's performance with admiration. "Military medical experience is impressive. Most hospitals would see that as an asset. Unless she was involved in something classified," Jennifer suggested dramatically. "Something she couldn't talk about." The speculation continued throughout the evening shift, but as the hours passed without word from Sarah or explanation from administration, the excitement began to fade into routine concern for a missing colleague. Dr. Martinez had called the emergency contact number from Sarah's personnel file, but it went directly to a voicemail system that didn't accept messages. Hospital administration had been contacted by federal officials who provided minimal information. Sarah Chun was assisting with a government matter and would return to work as soon as possible. 12 hours after Sarah's departure, as the next morning shift was beginning, Jennifer was surprised to find herself genuinely worried about her antagonistic colleague. Whatever Sarah was involved in was clearly serious enough to warrant military helicopter extraction, which suggested genuine danger rather than routine government business. "I hope she's okay," Rebecca said as they reviewed the morning patient assignments. "Whatever this is about, it must be important." Jennifer found herself nodding in agreement, though she was reluctant to admit that she had developed a grudging respect for Sarah's abilities. "She's tougher than she looks," Jennifer conceded. "If anyone can handle whatever this is, probably she can." Meanwhile, 6,000 miles away, Sarah was rappelling from a Navy helicopter onto the roof of the American Embassy in Moldavia. She wore full tactical medical gear and carried enough supplies to treat multiple trauma patients under combat conditions. It had been 8 months since she had been in this kind of operational environment, but her training and instincts kicked in immediately. The embassy building showed signs of the assault: broken windows, damaged doors, and bullet holes in the exterior walls. Sarah could hear voices shouting in Romanian from inside the building as she made her way to the predetermined entry point. "Angel 1 to base," she spoke in her radio headset. "I'm in position." Beginning approach to hostages. The militants had agreed to allow her access to the injured hostages, but only under strict conditions. She would be escorted by armed guards at all times, would have no direct communication with rescue forces, and would be considered a hostage herself until the situation was resolved. Sarah entered the embassy through a side entrance, where she was met by 3 armed men who searched her medical supplies thoroughly before allowing her to proceed. They spoke to her in broken English, but she responded in fluent Romanian, which seemed to surprise and please them. "I am here to help the injured people," she told them in their native language. "I need to see them immediately." The guards led her to the embassy's main conference room, where the hostages were being held. Sarah's medical training allowed her to quickly assess the situation. Ambassador Richardson was unharmed, but clearly stressed about his daughter's medical condition. His wife was holding their 8-year-old daughter, Melissa, who was showing early signs of diabetic ketoacidosis. In the corner of the room, Two embassy staff members were lying on makeshift stretchers. Both had been shot during the initial assault and had received only basic first aid. One was conscious but in obvious pain from a shoulder wound. The other was unconscious with what appeared to be a serious abdominal injury. "I need to treat the child first," Sarah told the guards in Romanian. She could die without immediate medical attention. The guards conferred among themselves, then nodded their agreement. Sarah approached the ambassador's family and knelt beside Melissa. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly to the frightened girl. "I'm Sarah, and I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you feel better." Sarah quickly established in 4-line and began administering insulin and fluids to correct Melissa's blood sugar levels. As she worked, she spoke quietly to the child in English, providing comfort and reassurance. "You're being very brave," Sarah told Melissa as she monitored her response to treatment. "Your mom and dad are so proud of you." Ambassador Richardson watched with obvious relief as his daughter's condition began to stabilize. "Thank you," he whispered to Sarah. "We've been so worried." Sarah moved next to the two injured embassy staff members. The first man, a security officer named Johnson, had been shot in the shoulder. The wound was painful, but not life-threatening. Sarah cleaned and dressed the injury, administered pain medication, and assured him that he would be fine. The second patient was more critical. David Chun, a cultural attaché, had suffered a gunshot wound to the abdomen and had been losing blood for several hours. Sarah quickly assessed his condition and realized he needed immediate surgery to survive. "I need to operate on him," she told the guards in Romanian. "He will die without surgery." The guards seemed uncertain about this development. They had agreed to allow basic medical treatment, but surgery was beyond what they had anticipated. "If he dies while I'm here, it will be considered murder by the American government," Sarah explained. "This will make your situation much worse." After another conference among themselves, the guards agreed to let Sarah perform emergency surgery. Using the embassy's first aid supplies and improvised surgical instruments, Sarah worked to repair the internal damage and control the bleeding. It was the kind of field surgery she had performed many times in combat zones, but never under the watchful eyes of hostile captors. The guards stood around her as she worked, their weapons ready, creating an atmosphere of tension that made the already difficult procedure even more challenging. For 3 hours, Sarah worked to save David Chen's life while simultaneously monitoring Melissa's diabetic condition and keeping Johnson comfortable. She rotated between patients, adjusting medications, checking vital signs, and providing the kind of comprehensive medical care that the militants had not expected. As evening approached, Sarah could hear increased activity outside the embassy. Through the windows, she could see government vehicles and military personnel establishing a perimeter. The rescue operation was being prepared, but she knew that her primary job was to keep the hostages alive until help arrived. The guards had become increasingly agitated as the day progressed. They argued among themselves in Romanian, and Sarah could understand enough to know that they were disagreeing about their next steps. Some wanted to negotiate for safe passage out of the country. Others wanted to make additional demands. A few seemed to regret the entire operation. "They're scared," Sarah realized. These weren't hardened terrorists. They were young men who had gotten involved in something beyond their capabilities and were now trapped in a situation they didn't know how to resolve. Sarah made a decision that went beyond her medical mission. She began talking to the guards in Romanian, not as a hostile American, but as someone who understood their language and culture. "You know this won't end well if someone gets hurt," she told them during a quiet moment. "The little girl is getting better, but she needs to get to a real hospital soon. The man I operated on needs additional surgery that I can't perform here." The guards listened as Sarah continued. "You wanted to make a statement about American foreign policy. You've done that. The whole world is watching now. But if you let the hostages die, you'll be remembered only as murderers, not as people fighting for a cause." Her words seemed to have an impact. The guards began talking among themselves with less hostility and more uncertainty. Sarah could see that they were reconsidering their position. As night fell, negotiators outside established radio contact with the militants. Sarah was allowed to provide medical updates on the hostages' conditions, and she used the opportunity to relay intelligence about the guards' emotional state and their possible willingness to negotiate. "Base, this is Angel 1," she reported during one radio contact. "All hostages are stable. The subjects appear open to negotiation. Recommend emphasizing safe passage rather than prosecution." The negotiation process continued through the night. Sarah provided continuous medical care while also serving as an unofficial cultural interpreter, helping both sides understand each other's positions and find common ground. Finally, as dawn broke over the embassy compound, an agreement was reached. The militants would release all hostages in exchange for safe passage to a third country and a guarantee that their political statement will be publicized by international media. Sarah was the last person to leave the embassy, ensuring that David Chun was stable enough for helicopter medical evacuation and that Melissa's blood sugar remained under control. As she walked out of the building with the other hostages, she could see the massive rescue operation that had been prepared: military personnel, medical teams, and government officials who had been waiting throughout the crisis. Ambassador Richardson stopped her before she boarded the medical helicopter. "I don't know who you are or how you happen to be available for this mission," he said, "but you saved my daughter's life and probably all of our lives." "Thank you." Sarah nodded and climbed into the helicopter, where she continued providing medical care to David Chun during the flight to a military medical facility. Only when all the hostages had been turned over to hospital care did she allow herself to think about returning to her civilian life. Commander Williams met her at the military facility. "Outstanding work, Chief. The State Department wants to thank you personally, and there's talk of a commendation." "Sir, I just want to return to my civilian job. People are probably wondering where I disappeared to." Commander Williams smiled. "I think your cover as a quiet new nurse has been permanently compromised. When we landed that helicopter on your hospital's helipad, we made it pretty clear that you're not just another nursing school graduate." Sarah realized he was right. There was no way to return to St. Mary's General Hospital and pretend that nothing had happened. Her colleagues now knew that she was involved with something far beyond routine civilian nursing. "What do I tell them?" she asked. "As little as possible about the operational details," Commander Williams replied. "But you don't have to hide your military service anymore. In fact, your hospital should be proud to have a nurse with your capabilities and experience." As Sarah flew back toward home, she wondered how her colleagues would react when she returned to work. Would they treat her differently? Would Jennifer's hostility increase or decrease now that she knew Sarah's real background? Would Dr. Martinez and Linda be impressed or concerned about having a former military operative on their nursing staff? Most importantly, would Sarah be able to settle back into the routine of civilian nursing after being reminded of the adrenaline and purpose she had found in military medical missions? The helicopter carrying her home touched down on the same hospital helipad where her extraction had begun 36 hours earlier. Sarah could see faces at various hospital windows, watching her return with obvious curiosity. As she walked through the hospital entrance, still wearing her tactical medical gear, Sarah knew that her life as the quiet new nurse was over. For better or worse, everyone would now know that Sarah Chun was much more than she had appeared to be. Sarah's return to St. Mary's General Hospital created a stir that rippled through every department. Word had spread not just about her mysterious disappearance and dramatic helicopter extraction, but also about her equally dramatic return. Hospital staff members who had never heard of the quiet new nurse in the emergency department suddenly knew her name and were eager to catch a glimpse of her. As Sarah walked through the main entrance, still carrying her military medical gear, she could feel dozens of eyes following her movement. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as she passed, and she could hear the whispered speculation beginning immediately behind her. "Is that her? The nurse who got picked up by the military? I heard she was involved in some kind of international incident. Someone said she's actually Special Forces or CIA." The elevator ride to the emergency department felt endless. When the doors opened, Sarah found herself facing the entire day shift nursing staff, who had apparently been waiting for her return. The nurses' station had been transformed into an impromptu gathering place, with staff members from other departments joining the emergency nurses in their curiosity about Sarah's return. Jennifer stood at the center of the group, her expression unreadable. For once, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words rather than simply hostile. Mark Stevens was beside her, looking at Sarah with what appeared to be newfound respect mixed with uncertainty. Dr. Martinez stepped forward from the group. "Sarah, welcome back. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied quietly, though she was acutely aware that her tactical gear and the circumstances of her return made her look anything but like a typical civilian nurse. Linda Rodriguez emerged from her office, looking relieved but also concerned. "Sarah, we need to talk." "My office, please." As Sarah followed Linda toward the office, she could hear the explosion of conversation behind her. The speculation and theories were flying freely now that the staff had confirmed she was really back and appeared unharmed. In Linda's office, Sarah found Dr. Martinez, Linda, and, surprisingly, the hospital's chief administrator, Mr. David Harrison. Harrison was a man in his early 50s who rarely ventured down to the emergency department unless there was a serious problem or potential liability issue. "Please, sit down," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair across from the small conference table where the three administrators had positioned themselves. Sarah remained standing. "If this is about my absence from work, I understand that I'll probably face disciplinary action. I couldn't provide advance notice, and I know that left you short-staffed." "Actually," Harrison said, "we've been contacted by federal officials who explained that you were providing essential assistance with a matter of national security. They've requested that we accommodate your potential future availability for similar situations." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had hoped to return to a normal civilian life, but it seemed that her military past was going to continue affecting her present. "I want to be clear," Sarah said firmly. "I took this job because I want to work as a civilian nurse. I'm not interested in being on call for military operations." Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Sarah, we're not trying to push you back into military service, but we need to understand what we're dealing with here. The staff is confused and concerned. There are rumors flying around that range from reasonable to completely absurd." "What would you like to know?" Sarah asked. Linda spoke up. "Let's start with the basics. What's your actual medical background?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I served 4 years as a Navy hospital corpsman. I was deployed twice to combat zones where I provided battlefield medical care. After my discharge, I attended nursing school and obtained my civilian nursing license. Everything on my employment application is accurate, but incomplete," Harrison observed. "Yes, I didn't list my military service because I wanted to start fresh in civilian healthcare. I thought my military experience might create expectations or assumptions that would interfere with my ability to work as a regular staff nurse." Dr. Martinez nodded. "That explains your advanced clinical skills, but it doesn't explain why the military needed to extract you via helicopter for a classified mission." Sarah hesitated. "I can't discuss the specifics of what I was asked to do, but I can tell you that it involved providing medical care to American civilians in a dangerous situation. My language skills and combat medical experience made me uniquely qualified to help." "Language skills?" Linda asked. "I speak fluent Romanian." It was relevant to the situation. Harrison made notes as Sarah spoke. "The federal officials who contacted us suggested that you might receive similar requests in the future. How should we handle that?" "I hope there won't be similar requests," Sarah said honestly. "But if there are, I would appreciate the hospital's understanding that sometimes there are circumstances beyond normal employment policies." The three administrators exchanged glances. Finally, Harrison spoke. "Sarah, we're going to support you in this. Your military service is something to be proud of, not something to hide. And your willingness to serve your country when called upon reflects well on you and on this hospital. However," Linda added, "we need to address the situation with the nursing staff. There's a lot of speculation and confusion. Some of it needs to be corrected before it affects patient care or department morale. Sarah nodded. What do you suggest? A brief staff meeting, Dr. Martinez said. Nothing dramatic, just enough information to settle the rumors and allow everyone to focus on their jobs again. An hour later, the emergency department nursing staff gathered in the break room for an impromptu meeting. Sarah sat at the front of the room while Linda introduced the purpose of the gathering. I know everyone has questions about Sarah's absence and return, Linda began. Rather than let speculation continue, we thought it would be better to address this directly. Jennifer raised her hand immediately. Is it true that she's some kind of secret agent? Sarah almost smiled at the directness of the question. No, I'm not a secret agent. I'm a Navy veteran who served as a hospital corpsman. Sometimes my previous experience is relevant to situations that require both medical skills and military background. Mark Stevens asked the next question. So, when you demonstrated those advanced clinical skills, that wasn't from nursing school. I learned basic nursing skills in school, Sarah replied. But my clinical experience comes from 4 years of providing medical care in combat zones. I've treated everything from routine illnesses to major trauma under extremely difficult conditions. Rebecca Martinez, who had been one of the few nurses to speak positively about Sarah, raised her hand. Why didn't you just tell us about your military service from the beginning? Most people would be impressed by that background. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. I wanted to be accepted as a nurse, not as a former military medic. I was concerned that people might expect me to be different or treat me differently if they knew about my military background. Jennifer's expression had shifted from hostility to something approaching respect. So, when I was giving you a hard time about basic nursing procedures, you probably already knew how to do everything I was trying to teach you. I knew how to do most of it, Sarah admitted. But every hospital has different policies and procedures. I really did need to learn how things are done here. And when I said you'd never be able to handle a real emergency, Jennifer continued, you'd probably already handled emergencies that make our trauma bay look like a quiet clinic. Different kinds of emergencies, Sarah said diplomatically. Civilian healthcare and military medicine have different challenges. Dr. Martinez addressed the group. What's important for everyone to understand is that Sarah's background makes her a valuable asset to our team. Military medics receive training that's often more advanced than what civilian nurses learn in school. We should view her experience as a resource, not as something suspicious or threatening. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with staff members asking questions about military medical training, deployment experiences, and how Sarah's background might affect her work in the emergency department. By the end of the discussion, the atmosphere had shifted from suspicion and speculation to curiosity and cautious acceptance. As the staff dispersed back to their patient care duties, Jennifer approached Sarah directly. I owe you an apology, Jennifer said quietly. I was threatened by your skills and took it out on you. I thought you were trying to show me up, but you were just doing what you were trained to do. Sarah was surprised by Jennifer's candor. You don't need to apologize. Starting a new job is always challenging, especially when you're trying to figure out the social dynamics. But I made it harder than it needed to be, Jennifer insisted. I was so focused on protecting my position as the senior nurse that I didn't give you a fair chance. I appreciate that, Sarah said, and I understand wanting to maintain your role as a mentor and leader. Your experience in this specific department is valuable, even if my overall medical background is different. Jennifer nodded. Maybe we could start over? I'd actually like to learn some of the techniques you use. That's where you started on the difficult patient. I've never seen anyone do it that smoothly. For the first time since starting at St. Mary's, Sarah felt like she might be able to build positive working relationships with her colleagues. The forced revelation of her military background had actually created opportunities for better understanding and cooperation. The rest of the shift proceeded more smoothly than any Sarah had experienced since starting at the hospital. Her colleagues treated her with a new level of respect, but also with genuine interest in learning from her experience. Several nurses asked her about specific techniques she had demonstrated, and Dr. Martinez consulted with her about treatment approaches for complex cases. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, Sarah received a text message from Commander Williams. Media interest in embassy situation. Recommend maintaining low profile. Your service record remains classified. Sarah showed the message to Linda, who nodded understandingly. We'll handle any media inquiries through hospital administration. You don't need to worry about talking to reporters. As Sarah's shift ended, she realized that while her cover as a quiet new nurse had been permanently blown, the revelation of her true background had actually improved her working environment. She no longer had to pretend to be less capable than she was, and her colleagues could finally understand why she possessed advanced skills. But as she walked to her car, Sarah noticed a news van parked across the street from the hospital. A reporter was interviewing what appeared to be hospital visitors, probably trying to gather information about the military nurse who had been involved in an international incident. Sarah's phone rang as she reached her car. It was Commander Williams again. Chun, we have a situation developing. The story about the embassy rescue has leaked to the media, and your name is being mentioned in connection with the mission. How much detail is being reported? Sarah asked. Not much yet, but there's enough interest that reporters are digging deeper. We're going to need you to maintain operational security about mission details. Understood, sir. What about my civilian job? There are already reporters at the hospital. Hospital administration has been briefed on media protocols. They'll handle press inquiries appropriately. But you should be prepared for increased attention for the next several days. As Sarah drove home, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few days. She had gone from being a mysterious new nurse to being a known military veteran, and now apparently to being a person of public interest due to her role in an international incident. The quiet, anonymous life she had tried to build was definitely over. The question now was whether she could find a way to use her military experience positively in civilian nursing without being constantly pulled back into military operations or media attention. When she arrived at her apartment complex, Sarah noticed another news van parked nearby. Clearly, her address had been discovered by reporters as well. She parked in a different location and entered her building through a side entrance, hoping to avoid any confrontations with journalists. Inside her apartment, Sarah sat down to process everything that had happened. In 3 days, she had gone from being the quiet new nurse whom nobody respected to being a known military veteran involved in international incidents. Her colleagues now treated her with respect, but they also viewed her as someone fundamentally different from a typical civilian nurse. Most concerning was the realization that her military past would continue to influence her civilian future. Commander Williams had made it clear that she might receive similar requests for assistance, and the media attention suggested that her military background would never be completely behind her. As she prepared for bed, Sarah received a text message from Jennifer. Thanks for being patient with me today. Looking forward to learning from you tomorrow. It was a small gesture, but it represented a significant change in her work environment. For the first time since starting at St. Mary's, Sarah felt like she belonged on the nursing team. The next morning would bring new challenges as she learned to navigate life as a publicly known military veteran working in civilian healthcare. But tonight, for the first time in months, Sarah felt like she had found a way to honor both her military service and her civilian aspirations. The integration of her two identities wouldn't be easy, but it was finally possible. 3 months had passed since the embassy incident, and Sarah's life had settled into a new normal that was both more complex and more fulfilling than her original plan. The media attention had eventually died down, but the changes to her daily life at St. Mary's General Hospital had become permanent. She was no longer the quiet new nurse. She was Sarah Chun, Navy veteran and emergency department specialist. The transformation in her working relationships had been remarkable. Jennifer, who had once been her primary antagonist, had become one of her strongest allies and closest friends. The two women had discovered that their different backgrounds created complementary strengths that made them an exceptionally effective team. Sarah, I need your opinion on something, Jennifer said as they reviewed the morning assignments. We've got a patient in Bay 3 who was in a motorcycle accident. His injuries aren't life-threatening, but he's refusing treatment because he's afraid of hospitals. Sarah looked up from the chart she was reviewing. What kind of afraid? Phobia or traumatic experience? He says hospitals remind him of being wounded in Afghanistan. He's a veteran, and I think he's having some kind of PTSD response to being here. Sarah nodded, understanding immediately. I'll talk to him. Sometimes it helps to have another veteran explain what's happening medically. This had become a common pattern over the past months. Sarah's military background had made her the informal liaison for veteran patients who came through the emergency department. Her ability to understand their experiences and speak their language had proven invaluable in providing care to patients who might otherwise refuse treatment or become combative in medical settings. The patient in Bay 3 was Marcus Rodriguez, a former Army infantry sergeant who had been injured when his motorcycle skidded on wet pavement. He was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, fully dressed, clearly preparing to leave despite having obvious injuries to his leg and shoulder. "Mr. Rodriguez," Sarah said as she entered the bay. "I'm Sarachen. I'm a Navy veteran, and I'm here to help you get the medical care you need." Marcus looked up suspiciously. "You were Navy? When did you serve?" "For years as a hospital corpsman. 2 deployments. I understand why hospitals can be difficult for veterans." Marcus's defensive posture relaxed slightly. "It's the sounds, you know? The monitors, the intercoms, the way people move around urgently. It reminds me of the field hospital where they brought me after my convoy got hit." Sarah pulled up a chair and sat down at Marcus's level. "I get it. The environment here can trigger memories of being wounded or seeing wounded buddies. But right now, you've got injuries that need attention, and ignoring them won't make them go away." "How bad is it?" Marcus asked. Sarah examined his injuries with gentle, professional movements. "Your shoulder is probably just bruised, but your leg has a laceration that needs stitches and possibly a fracture that needs x-rays. Nothing life-threatening, but definitely things that need proper treatment. And you'll be the one treating me? I'll be involved in your care, yes. And I can explain everything that's happening as we go along, so there won't be any surprises." Marcus agreed to stay for treatment, and Sarah spent the next hour working with him while explaining each step of the process. She was able to keep him calm and cooperative throughout the examination, x-rays, and wound care that he needed. As they finished up, Marcus thanked her. "You know, this is the first time I've been in a hospital since I got back from overseas that I didn't feel like I was going to panic. Thank you for understanding." Stories like Marcus's have become increasingly common as word spread through the local veteran community that St. Mary's had a former Navy corpsman on staff. Sarah had developed informal protocols for working with veteran patients, and the emergency department had seen improved outcomes and patient satisfaction scores as a result. Dr. Martinez had noticed the impact of Sarah's work with veterans and had approached her about formalizing her role. "Sarah, I've been thinking about creating a veteran liaison position in the emergency department, something that would recognize your special skills and give you protected time to work with veteran patients who need extra attention." "That sounds interesting," Sarah had replied. "What would that look like?" "Part of your regular nursing.